This is Ronnie Span. I'm sitting here with Kirk Washington, and I'm doing an interview for a public works class. And the topic is teacher identity. And I'm going to let Kirk fill us in with a bit of information about his experience in the Minneapolis school system here. Go ahead, Kirk.
Hi, been in education close to 21 years. A lot of experiences in those years. Seen a lot of things come and go. Seen a lot of things stick. Seen a lot of new things. Started out as a kid wanting to be a teacher. Got into education probably a year after I graduated. Deep down, I was an artist and I wanted to teach art, and so that's pretty much been my passion. And I've had to do all kind of different approaches to reach kids, and it's a process. Like I said, I've been at it for a long time. I don't know everything, but I do know a lot of stuff, and I'm thankful to share some of my experiences and to help maybe people get some clarity about the state of education from my perspective.
Okay. Let's see. Now, as an education student and life learner, how do you feel? What do you feel the state of education is in the state of Minnesota right now?
With one word, or sum it up?
Let's sum it up.
To sum it up, I think that the state of Minnesota, we got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do. A whole lot. The state of Minnesota demographically has changed over those last 20 years. The city of Minneapolis has became even more transient than when I started. People move here and leave all the time, and sometimes people stay, but we have a huge we have a huge Spanish-speaking population that they didn't have 20 years ago. We have a huge East African population. We have a lot of Southeast Asia. Like, the city is really bubbling and busting at the seams, demographically, as far as different cultures. And so, to sum it up, I think that I don't think the city is prepared for that.
Okay.
I don't think the city is prepared or was prepared for that.
Okay. Now, as a black educator and as a black male educator, how do you how would you say your educational experience in Minnesota has affected your identity as a teacher?
Well, the best thing is that most of the people who I look like, the first couple of things that they fought for after the Reconstruction period was education, and that piece historically is there. What do African Americans know? How do they learn? These are all questions that are facing the state, the city. As a black person, am I qualified to do certain things, or am I qualified to do just other things? In specific, there's a lot to be said, because there's a racial achievement gap in the city. There's a lot of legislation surrounding that. So as a teacher, I look at my students, and I look at the people that I'm teaching with, and a lot of that is just it's changed. It's changed. And so as a black person, in Minneapolis, we're a small minority of the population. We're not that many people.
Right.
Uh, so I mean, like there's a lot of that kind of stuff in there. Um, and then we could talk about it later. But race is definitely at the forefront at the inner city of Minneapolis, and how those kids are how they're succeeding or not succeeding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that race plays a role? Say you being a black man, like how do you feel that impacts your students when you're in the classroom with them?
It depends on the kids' experiences. You know, you would like to not, but you have to think about that because uh, the image is everything. You know, images stuff. The images are on television, they're on computers, they're in magazines, they're in books. The people look at stuff every day. So if a person, you know, brings their kid to my classroom for me to teach them third grade or to teach art, and they want to meet me at an open house, if they've never lived around black people, you know, if they've never had a close personal relationship with a black person, it's definitely a factor how you communicate with each other. Definitely. Um, but that's all a reflection of society as well. But I mean, the piece for me is that Minneapolis is what 300 plus thousand people. It's not a lot of people.
Right.
It's not like a major metropolis where people are forced to look at each other and deal with each other. You know, there's places where people don't have any black people in their town in the state of Minnesota. So a lot of that stuff we're seeing that socially that kind of stuff is changing. You know, where black people are moving to cities like Rochester and St. Cloud, you know, and all the immigrant groups that I talked about are moving to places like that as well. So a lot of these districts are using Minneapolis's model on how to reach students. And so there's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about race. But at the end of the day, you have to get the job done. You know, you have to, the kids have to be educated. You know, they can't teach themselves. So it's interesting, but the people that are really focused on just, you know, making sure that the kids get taught, there still are some success stories, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
As far as you being a black male teacher, how do you think like what have been the dynamics between you and other teachers, whether they be professional or paraprofessional, black teachers, white teachers, like you know what's the dynamic there?
Well, I think it depends on the black person. Just like anything, it depends on the individual. Um, there are times when I feel, you know, that things are going great. You know, I'm communicating with some of my fellow teachers and staff members, and then there's other times where I'm wondering, you know, how in the hell did we get here? And that all plays out. I mean, it's your personality. If you're the kind of person that, you know, you're easily distracted and it's hard for you to focus, right now you probably won't be as successful in education because there's all these external elements that are affecting. You know, Minneapolis has one of the highest racial achievement gaps in the country. You know, if not the highest. You know, and
Right.
per capita, there's not that many black people to have a racial achievement gap. And when they bring, you know, experts to look at it, you know, they look at things like, you know, are these kids eating the same lunch? Are they sitting in the same classroom? Are the chairs adequate? Is the lighting? Instead of looking at the cultural pieces, like what did these kids have to go through to get to school today? Where did they sleep at last night? Did they sleep last night? Were they fed dinner last night? Were they cleaned? And so for me as a teacher, as a person, as a man, you know, beside the race, it's hard to reach students that don't know where they're going to sleep at tonight, that they don't know if they're going to eat. They don't know when's the last time they've combed their hair, brushed their teeth, or washed their body. You know, they don't know who's going to look after them because their mom and dad haven't been around, or their mom's around and she got to work all the time, or whatever the case may be, these issues are really starting to affect districts culturally, because what's happening is that there's like when people say buy the book, well, the book is, we're noticing, is it's becoming more and more obsolete as far as how to deal with students, and that's just not just black students. Like, the world has changed so much in the last 20 years that it's really hard for schools to keep up. So for me, with all the negatives, the positives is that if institutions and districts and departments of education, if they're prepared and they got their stuff together, then they can ride the wave of this future. So you see kids now, because of the digital divide, social economics, a lot of kids that are black can't afford computers. So high schools, are letting kids rent the computer so they can take it home and work on it as well. They could do their assignments and put it in a Dropbox online. So that those are some of the great things that's happening for students. Like, maybe nobody in your family ever had a computer. I mean, they're pretty common now, but one of the schools I was just at, the kids had MacBooks.
Okay.
And for them, it's kind of like an incentive. When you're a kid, it's like, man, I got this Apple computer. But what happens is you begin to learn the language of Mac. And so, there's always good and bad in everything. But for me, about the piece about identity, there's still a lot of dirty work to do, because we're seeing it. And, there's some places in the country where, they have these tenured teachers and they can't fire them.
Right.
They're not effective. They may be racist. They may be sexist. They may be prejudiced. They may be all these nasty things as a person. But they're tenured, teachers. And so these districts can't fire them. And it's too bad, because, we're seeing a lot of stuff happen in schools. Like, we're seeing violence in schools where people are going in and just gunning people down, kids.
Right.
And that's scary. Like, I'm a parent too, so I'm sending my kids to a school. Some kid might not like the way some kids dealt with them, and now this kid's gonna come back and do some that's gonna like change everybody's life, like bringing a gun to school and shooting and killing people. So a lot of it, when you listen to these people's stories, it goes back to the question that you asked me: do people of color feel safe in these schools? And the answer, to sum it up, is no. We wouldn't have, Columbine. We wouldn't have Virginia Tech. And the list is just getting longer every year. Like, where they just have this, or they have like the girls jumping on each other and putting it on YouTube. And so it's a real question mark about how to proceed, because schools have always been a target, from legislators and stuff, because of the spending that they have to put into these schools to make them go.
Right.
These schools need budgets, and they, but it's as a black person, man, it's very interesting that as a kid you would have thought that by now we would have fixed this race thing, because it wasn't working when it got started, and it ain't never worked.
Right.
So now that we see stuff like violence, now that we see stuff like kids, like a couple of the schools that we're at, kids have like these groups where they could for about identity, like kids can come out and say, well, we're having I don't know how to put it, like a GLBT group,
support group,
because the kids are beating them,
right,
or kids are making them feel isolated. That stuff is unprecedented.
Right.
Like they've had like groups where people have been into their like race, like we're gonna have like the Hmong American, support group or whatever. But now it's like if you're not part of like the dominant narrative or the dominant culture, then you're trying to gain power somehow, some way.
Yeah,
we're seeing that in students, so it's
create
interesting.
your own subfield.
Yeah, you know, create your identity, and it's hard. I mean, because it's social work. It's the social piece to us as people, you know, in the world, because we're supposed to be guiding these students. You know what I mean? To become better human beings. And so that's to me is like the real question when you say identity. Like, what kind of identity do we have as educators when we're going into these buildings? Because I tell you, you know, as a teacher, I always spend more time. Can you imagine? I spend more time in the building with these people and these kids than I do at my own house, just like any other job.
Right.
So this is like a family.
Right.
You know, it should be. Well, it is. I shouldn't say it should be, but you know, every family is different. Well, what we're seeing is like there's this template.